Well, my name is Bud Marseille, and I've been sailing on skipjacks for about 20 years now, but I am not a waterman. I am not from the Eastern Shore. I am not a licensed Coast Guard captain. I am a volunteer, and I do have a passion for skipjacks and for local history. I'm a come here, I'm a transplant, and the way that I've learned about things and why it is the way it is around here is by understanding the people, understanding the heritage. You've got to do that, I think, in order to really establish firm roots where you end up being transported. So today's talk is about skipjacks and oysters. I'm going to start off about oysters, and I'm not going to talk about the animal, but I am going to talk about the people, because the people who harvested oysters are extremely important, and they're also the people that led to the evolution of skipjack. I kind of got into this during the pandemic when I wanted something to do, so I started I read a little article about, I think, one of the oyster war battles, and that kind of got me started into things, and I read enough articles that things didn't make sense. I said, I have to understand more about the people first in order to put things in the correct context. So that kind of got me into the idea of talking about the people in the oyster wars. You go back to colonial days, John Smith first came to the Bay. You had 35,000 people living in the watershed. Now you've got about 18 million. You had all kinds of exotic fish like the sturgeon down here. You have oysters down here in the bottom. There, yeah, the oysters down there in the bottom. And they said you could see down 21, 22 feet, clear water. Today it's about 18 inches, maybe 24 inches at best. But again, 18, 19 million people, they make a big difference in the environment. Map, you've got a copy of the map there, a map of the Maryland part of the Chesapeake Bay was loaded with oysters. A lot of them on the eastern shore, also on the western shore. And this map is color-coded. We'll talk a little more about the types of oyster harvests. We had tongers, we had dredgers, we have scrapers. Today you have divers, but they weren't divers back then. But the bay was loaded with oysters, and it was really a natural resource that was underappreciated for many, many years. Baltimore became the oyster capital of the world. At one time, 40% of the world's oysters came out of Maryland. And I've read articles from Bismarck, Dakota Territory, back before it became a state. Somebody advertising a shipment of Baltimore oysters coming in. Now, they're canned, obviously, but Baltimore oysters coming in and for sale. So all over the country, Baltimore and Maryland oysters were quite prevalent. There's a book. Now, government publications usually are kind of snoozes, but this one was kind of unique. It's from the 10th annual census of the United States, and it's about the oyster industry. Ernest Ingersoll is the writer, and this is kind of one of those Rosetta Stone type things when you look at the oystering in the 1880s, 1890s, whatever. A lot of stuff comes from this publication. I read an article from the New York Sun, December 7th, 1887, and this was when newspaper pages were the size of a circus poster, and the whole page was nothing but oysters and oyster war battles. And boy, that's it, but it wasn't, because they copied copiously from this government publication. So we'll talk more about this in a little coming on up. But basically, if you look at the oyster industry of the 1880s, he had about 53,000 people were employed nationwide. Half of those people came from Maryland. He had 20 million bushels of oysters harvested in 1880. Half of them came from Maryland. 10 million bushels. I have trouble with visualizing that kind of number, so I did a little bit of math. 10 million bushel baskets would stretch from Baltimore to Las Vegas over 2,300 miles. That is a mind-boggling number, but that's what they used to do back during the high point of the oyster industry. Oysters, of course, came in cans. These are from Clayton in Cambridge. This packing house is still in business. They do crabs in the summer, clams, oysters in the winter. You can go in there and buy directly from the cannery. They write things up on the old paper with a carbon slip on it and everything else. I'm not sure if it takes credit cards or not, probably does. But Epicure oysters they're still in business, one of the few packing houses that still remains, representative of one of hundreds, and we'll talk more about packers in a couple of minutes. Oyster economics. Here's buying your seafood, buying your fresh oysters right on the dock, off the dock, penny a piece. Waterman was paid 25 cents a bushel back in the day. Today, you go to a restaurant in Washington, D.C., I'm told, that, $3.50, $4 for an oyster at the wrong bottom. So if you got a good expense account, that's certainly, I would recommend that. People. You can't have oysters without people in boats, so we're going to talk about people in boats here. Bohemians were the general name given to the immigrants who came in to the country to harvest oysters. And what would happen is that these flyers would go out in whatever language, happened to be German, they talk about come to a certain place on a certain date, take a ship over to America where the streets are paved with gold, you make your fortune and everything else. And to get to America, you would probably be in steerage, you and 500 other people make that 10 to 12 day crossing. This is after you crossed in a train car from wherever your village was all the way across Europe, clutching this little flyer, which is the only thing you had that told you where you were going, and you'd eventually get across Europe farther and farther away from your home country and your home language to get to Bremen or some other place in Germany and finally make it to the United States. Health inspections were certainly one of the key and final barriers to entrance into the country. You had to pass a health inspection to get on the boat in the first place because they didn't want, and then you had another one to get off the boat once you got here. So going into quarantine is what would happen when your boat landed in the United States. You'd be quarantined for a certain period of time. You get through your health inspection, and eventually you'd wait to reunite with your family. The thing about this picture that kind of strikes me is a little boy sitting down here by himself. He passed, whether his family did or not, who knows? So you don't know what happened. Family separation is not something that is recent in occurrence. I'm sure it happened all through the years. Finally, you get to America. And what do you find? Get into downtown Baltimore, you're bombarded with people in all kinds of different languages and the smells and the sights of the city, and you've got to make your way around. You've got to figure out what you're going to do. Try not to fall prey to predators. Baltimore Harbor, and this is Light Street. Light Street Pavilion is right over here now. With all those horses, I don't think the streets were paved with gold. So there, the myths that people had heard are already starting to be dispelled as they come into the country. So in the oyster industry, you basically have 5 occupations: dredgers, scrapers, tongers, shuckers and packers, and the oyster police. The tools of the trade are tongs, shaft tongs. Everybody's seen those. You want to have tongs that are long enough to reach the bottom, so anywhere from 10 to 30 feet. Very well balanced tools. And if you go, of course, go to CBBM, go to Waterman's Wharf, you can pick up a set of tongs and you can actually dredge if you try that yourself. So you've got tongs, you've got dredges, and you've got patent tongs, which are like those amusement park grab things that you used to try to pick up the toys with. Dredging in Maryland is simply a general scramble carried out by 700 boats manned by 5,600 daring and unscrupulous men who regard neither the laws of God nor man. That's from that government publication. And it was written by a guy named Richard H. Edmonds. Mr. Edmonds started out as a errand boy at one of the Baltimore newspapers. By the time he was 21, he was a respected journalist. And he was subcontracted to write the Maryland part of this oyster report on fisheries. This is one of his more mild comments. So I kind of wonder whether he was a jilted lover who had it in for somebody in Maryland or what, because he says a lot of things that are not particularly complimentary, and this is one of his milder comments. Well, so we'll take a look at those dredgers that he was talking about. Another thing from Mr. Edmonds, he talks about the unscrupulousness of the captains as well assisted by the character of his men. The men taken as a class, perhaps one of the most depraved bodies of work to be found in the company. Well, Mr. Edmonds, I hope you're not holding back on your comments. Now, there are certainly stories that can certainly justify that tape. But basically what happened is he's really talking about Baltimore's oyster fleet. The Baltimore boats were probably the least well-maintained, most liable to run afoul with a war, and most liable to mistreat the crews. A lot of them were owned by canners and packing houses. Here's the basic tools of the trade: a hand winder and a dredge. You've got the winder and the dredge. Here they are in action coming up. You've got a couple of people cranking, hoisting up the dredge over the rollers here, and then you'll cull your oysters, throw the shells back over, and do another lick. And I'll talk about that in a little more detail in an upcoming slide. So here he is again. I'm not going to use his name anymore. You know who he is. The life is of the roughest kind. The unique work, when pursued legally, illegally, or legally, requires rapid work. It's hard. Personal story of my family. My grandmother's oldest brother ran away from home in September of 1900, 1901, something like that. Next spring, town constable brings this wild man to the house. Scared the heck out of my grandmother and her sisters. This guy is all bent over. His hands are like claws. He smelled, really bad. And he was hobbling. And it scared the girls, but when my great-grandmother saw him, she ran out, hugged him, kissed him. She recognized her son through all that filth and everything else. The hands, when they're red and raw like that, probably were handling a lot of oysters. Oyster shells are sharp on the edges, and so you pick up enough shells, you're going to cut your hand. And so he had the oyster hands. When they pried off his boots, there was a lot of dead skin on his feet. He had what they later called trench foot, from being cold and with wet feet all the time, bent over, hard work, face the color of a brick. So you know that he'd been outside working on a boat all the time. Had to be an oyster boat. We have no idea what won or anything or how well he was treated, but that was pretty much the condition of somebody who survived the season and made it back home. What they end up looking like. So here's a picture by Aubrey Bodine and of some of the men out here hauling up a dredge. And the next picture, which is a drawing almost like this, I'll explain a little bit about what goes into dredging. So this picture, it's of a sloop. You can tell it's a sloop by the size of the bow and by the way it's rigged. The wind is blowing into the picture. Your dredge winders are up here. You got 4 people at the winders. Your dredge line is down here into the water. When that line is tight, your dredge is biting into the oysters. When the line is bouncing around, you're off the oyster bed. So you're always looking at that line to see where you are, and captain, and make a little connection if necessary to get back on the bed. So that line is one point of reference that you want to use. Second point is this little point. This thing is out of you're out of alignment here.
Oh wow, it sure is.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a box down here. Oyster beds are out there in the water. From the surface, you can't tell where you are. In the days before sonar and depth finders and everything else, you'd feel the bottom, and you'd look at landmarks, triangulate to see where you were, and you then drag your bed along. You'd also be looking at the line, you'd be looking at your landmarks, and you'd throw over a little mark at the end of your lip, where you'd be picking up your dredge, turning around, going back to dredge for oysters again. You always want to dredge with the dredge out on the windward side, because if the wind drops, the boat won't drift over the dredge. Follow your line. The other thing that's important here is a little line off the stern. Now, a little line off the stern was probably the only safety that you have. If you fall off the boat, you might be able to grab that line. That line might have been connected to another yawl boat or not. But fall off the boat in the wintertime, things aren't looking too promising for your future. Here's a boat here's a picture shows working 2 dredges. Again, the interesting thing about this is the little boat out here in the background. One of the oyster police boats is kind of watching this guy, okay? Now, the dredges that he's using are small dredges called hand scrapes. But he's got the hand scrapes on a large boat. So chances are, when he got his license, he cheated a little bit about the cargo carrying capacity of the boat. He probably made it so it carried a lot less so that he could use that type of equipment.
Sure.
Sometimes you were icebound. Now, usually boats would stay out overnight. The Baltimore boats tend to stay away from the shore as much as possible because their crew might escape. Brutal work. So, if you stay out all the time and you're supplied by somebody else and offload your oysters onto a buy boat, better chance of keeping your crew. Scrapers are the next type of watermen. And, thought a little better about scrapers. They're morally somewhat superior to the dredgers. Well, we said about dredgers, you probably couldn't get much worse than that. So I'm not sure what kind of a compliment that was. Scraping is legal in Talbot, Dorchester, and Somerset counties. So, and the color version of that map, the yellow areas identify what the scrapers were. This is a well-dressed oyster bed. So, Annabelle, this one's for you. He does not have his foul weather gear on. This is just his winter gear. Put it on October, take it off February and March. He's got a liner up here in the top for his sou'wester. He's got his long outfit, probably made out of a quilting type material. Down on the bottom, you can see his boots, and his boots are folded over. And These are his garters right here to hold up his boots. You notice he's got the little drawstrings on his arms to kind of keep the water out as much as possible, and bare hands. Didn't wear gloves. I mean, that was usually, you might take every place else. So in bad weather, you go back to that boating picture, you'd have a black a liner over your hat here. You'd have black follow the gear, and your boots would come up, and you put the garters on. So that's what a well-dressed oysterman looked like back in the 1880s, and we challenge you to knit. That goes along with that. For those of you at home, she's knitting while watching the presentation. Pulling up a hand scrape with one of the small boats. On the Nathan, we use a hand scrape so that we have room for passengers. Tongers are another type of waterman. Tongs, everybody's seen tongs, and some people, that's a pride relic of some of the families who've kept them in their families for many, many years. A picture of tongers out there on their boats. Log canoes, if you've ever seen the log canoe races, the humble beginning of those log canoes were basically the canoes, or as my friend Ann Robbins says, the cunners, what they call them down in South Dorchester County. The canoes that we use, and you can see he's got probably 15, 20-foot shafts on his tongs, and all day long you're balancing on the gunnels, and you're putting those tongs down, you're raking your oysters together, you're squeezing, you're pulling them up, so you have tremendous muscles in your knees and in your arms. Tongers are poor members of the community. In Cambridge, you can see one person grabbing oysters within 15 feet of the shore, as well as way out in the river. So there were like about 1,900 boats with people tonging for oysters. Today, most of our oysters are caught by tong. So here's a picture of a couple of African-American men tonging. You got three on this boat. You can see, obviously, he's the guy who's been tonging up the oysters. The guy over here on the right is probably the color, and the other guy has a pole with graduated marks on it. He was probably just making sure where they are in the bed so we could get ready to reposition the boat. Crew of three, they rotate positions because it is hard work. And picture of log canoes. The only thing recognizable between these and today's log canoes is that the rake of the mast. Brogans were another type of boat, carved bottoms out of several different logs. Very little sawn lumber, because at that time sawn lumber was a lot more expensive. It was cheaper to take old trees and carve them and pin them together for part of your hull than it was to get sawn lumber. It was only, once you had a lot more steam engines around that you started having more powered mills and more sawn lumber. Shuckers and packers were the Bohemian. You had 6,100 males and 2,400 females. A lot of children too, but they didn't count the children. They worked dawn to dusk, 6 days a week, but there was no steady employment. You might go to the same place day after day after day, but one day, not me, I had somebody else. No job security, no anything. Over 9,000 boats filled with oysters docked in Baltimore during one given year. Now that's along with all the other boats that are coming in. Each boat was bringing in probably 200 to 300 bushels of oysters to feed that big number of 10 million bushels. And 30 to 40 freight cars full of canned oysters left Baltimore every day. Big production line. First thing you do is you might sell to a buy boat. Buy boats and runners. Runners were part of the transport system to get those oysters from the oyster beds up to the packing houses. You usually use old boats. In this case, it's an old pungy. That's final years being served, just hauling oysters from the beds on up. Baltimore Harbor, back in the day, you had, Atlantic shipping, and you had a lot of other boats. And right here in the middle, whoops, what did I do? Right here in the middle, I'm not going to play with that one anymore, but right here in the middle are some of your oyster boats out here.
Want me to make it bigger?
Yeah, well, as much as you can. So you got your oyster fleet out here in the middle. Again, you didn't go into shore any more than you had to because your crew could escape. So they're keeping them out there. And you've got, meanwhile, everything else, shipyards and all the other people working on the industry. Okay, go to the next one. Every time I saw pictures, everything was stilted. Everybody was in their best bib and tucker because taking pictures, they didn't do many candid pictures. So, you look at people. You've got people with their bushel baskets of oysters, loading them into a wagon. Everybody's in their Sunday best clothes. You've got the kids and everything else down. About the only accurate thing you can say is you've got a couple of boats tied to a dock, and you know that they had to load them into a wagon to get them to the place where they were going to be processed. Phillips Oyster Packers in Cambridge. Okay, Phillips during World War II, jumping ahead, had the contract for K rations and C rations, a wonderful military food that we, let's see if I can kill it before. And so the interesting thing about this picture is that in some cases, the packing and canning house will right on the water itself. Boat will pull up to the water, big boats, small boats. Resolution of the pictures is really poor, and we don't have AI. She didn't have AI zoom, which would fill in all the other little dots on there. So the picture gets a little worse the bigger you get it. So it's probably better in this size here. But you've got schooners, you've got you've got bug eyes, you've got boats with deeper draft in this picture. Men shuck raw oysters. To shuck a raw oyster, it takes a fair amount of strength. So men shuck the raw oysters, and the majority of the shuckers of raw oysters were African Americans. You worked a little booth, you'd fill a bucket, you'd get a token for each bucket that you filled. At the end of the day, you turn your buckets in for the day's wages, whatever that was. Women and children shucked steamed oysters. Again, you've got a production line going. You've got people bringing you oysters. You've got people carting away oyster shells. And you've got women and children. It is not bring your kids to work day. It is how do you make a living for your family. Pennies earned for every bucket filled. Maybe fractions of a penny, depending upon what the market was at the time. Child labor really wasn't outlawed until 1912. So it was nothing to think about, bring your kids to work. Yeah, bring your kids to work. If they can shuck a pail or two of oysters, maybe that's 25, 30 cents that helps feed the family. But again, the work was done by Bohemians. The work was done by foreigners. The local people held their nose up at that sort of thing. A lot hasn't changed over the years. Once your oysters are shut, you pack them, you put them in the cannery, put them in cans. So there was an industry there. And then the last step was sealing the tin. Now I love this picture for a couple of reasons. One is the guy smoking a pipe while sealing your oyster. Second is he is using lead solder to solder those oysters. So, but it was the last step, and that's how you could get those oysters out to the Dakota territories where people just had that appetite for oysters. The shell from a day's work was a problem. over here, we'll leave this one aside, but over here is a freight, part of a freight car. Here you got the guys, got a mixed crew here of Bohemians and African Americans, and a bunch of shell. What do you do with all the oyster shells?
Hey, Phil,
Yeah.
This is my great aunt and uncle around the turn of the century, walking down Key Highway. If you know where the Science Center is, and it's all oyster
Paving with shell, yeah. Yeah, shell was great for paving, especially over here on the eastern shore where you don't have any stones. You know, you'd shell, paving. You could grind it up for chicken grits. You could also burn it for limestone. So there's some commercial values for those shells. And Gladfelter Paper Company up in Pennsylvania has a dredge and has mining rights to dredge prehistoric shell out of some of the old beds. Every once in a while, you might see this big box of a building out on a barge. It's Gladfelter out there scarfing up old shells. But it was a problem. I mean, what do you do with 10 million bushels of shells?
We also didn't mention Phil.
Yes.
They extended the cities on oyster shell Phil.
Yeah.
Cambridge in particular.
Yeah, because what happens, your packing house is right on the water. They dump the old shells overboard. When that area filled up, you'd move the packing house out a little more on stilts, you'd fill underneath that. High harvest and high demand. Big thing to show about this picture is you're talking 14, 15 million bushels during the 1880s and 1890s. Certainly unsustainable. But the attitude of people at that time was there are so many oysters and they reproduce so well that we can take as many as we want without regard for quantities or anything else like that. Obviously, that proved to be false. A lot of other data in this, including diseases and everything else. A couple of talks could come out of this. The main thing I wanted to show you in this picture is 9, 10, 15 million bushels a year during this period of time. Tremendous depletion of a natural resource. So high demand, and of course you got to take those oysters out. Eventually you're going to run out of oysters in some places in the bay. Had a few legal deep water oysters, so we came to the time when the oyster pirates ruled the roost. Again, our friend says it's impossible for the oyster police to enforce the laws. 700 well-manned, fast-sailing boats are rather difficult to watch, especially at night. And political ineptness and weak laws first didn't help that any. There were basic, and the 700 boats he's talking about, just the dredge boats. He's not talking about the scrapers or the tongers. So, and you had an oyster police force with 2 steamers and 9 sloops to patrol 4,400 miles of Maryland waters. I could do a whole talk just on oyster war battles that happen around here. So I'm going to limit to one little picture to give you a little bit of an idea. And if you guys think I should do a talk about the oyster wars, I can do that some later time. You got 2 boats here. You've got the Oyster Navy sloop, the Nanny Merriman, exchanging fire with the dredging schooner, Eugene. Schooner's a lot bigger than the Nanny Merriman. And the Eugene happened to have rammed and capsized some tongers so that they could get in that area and dredge for oysters. But Eugene was fast enough to cause that damage and escape. The oyster police flagship is the ship Governor McLean. Notice, yes, that is a cannon. The oyster police did borrow cannon from the United States Navy. The oyster police had rules of engagement. They shot to disable, not to maim. The Pirates did not operate by the same rules. Fortunately, there were a lot of either poor shots or they took pity on each other because there weren't a lot of fatalities. There were some. But the McLean was an efficient way of patrolling. Problem was, it was used more for political junkets and fundraising or campaign fundraising than for upholding the law. So the consequences. Stealing oysters was a booming business, so to regulate the industry was extremely difficult, if not impossible. Oyster police couldn't control things. Deepwater oyster beds were over-harvested. Shallower beds were still abundant. You could certainly change the laws, and a shallow draft boat was needed to really get at those remaining oysters. So that's where we bring in the skipjack. Any questions so far? Anybody still awake? Did you drop a stitch yet? Okay. Okay. So I hope that you're kind of getting a sense that the Wild West wasn't confined to the Wild West. It was alive and well here along the Chesapeake, Maryland waters. An influx of people who had never been to this country started being the backbone of the workforce for this major industry. Along with this industry, you had Maryland state legislature, over half of the state senators were from the Eastern Shore. So the political power of the Eastern Shore was disproportionate to the rest of the state of Maryland. The two most important positions were the governor and the comptroller, not the lieutenant governor, the comptroller, the guy with the money. And usually the comptroller was from the Eastern Shore. So that gave a lot of political clout. In the little handout you have, the timeline, you'll see a little bit about changing laws. You know, the laws were changed in some cases to the benefit of particular parties. The canners had their own special interest groups. The packers had their own special interest groups. The tongers and the dredgers and the scrapers, all, while they interchanged, all had their own points of view and their own benefits from certain type of laws. So basically, we probably had the best government money could buy at that time. But it was a challenging time, and the hang with conservation, let's get what we can get, attitude was very prevalent. So we get to the point where, as that industry is at its peak, we don't want things, to keep the industry from collapsing, you've got to have innovation. And that's where the skipjack fits in. The other boats were much bigger boats, bigger draft boats, better suited for deeper water. Now, if your oysters are in shallower water and you get the laws to change, you need a different boat. So that's where the skipjack comes in. Shallow draft bridge boat with a crew of 3 to 5. Big sails for power, not speed. But you notice you've got that clipper ship bow on there, which is extremely important when plowing through the water, bringing that water apart. You've got, again, shallow draft, and you've got on the back of it, you've got a push boat, which we'll show you in the next picture, a couple pictures up. The size of the boats varied. Okay, there was no design, no one design for skipjack. They looked a lot alike above water, but below water they don't. We're talking about Wadey, Murphy, and Rebecca Rourke. Rebecca Rourke above the water looks like every other skipjack. Below the water, has a very different hull. So the skipjack formula, okay? The length of the boat on deck plus the width of the boat is the height of the mast. Again, this is on the test. Okay? The length of the boat on deck plus the width is the height of the mast. You could also say the length of the bowsprit is also the width of the boat. So the overall length is also pretty much the height of the boat. In this drawing, you can see lines out here. These are lazy jack lines. The idea of the jack lines is that when you drop the sail, sail stays confined within those lines on the port starboard side, so your sail doesn't flop over. And of course, he's got the cabin on here, and he's got his work boat or his push boat or his yawl boat off on the stern. By 1925, motors had pretty much replaced a lot of sails. I was reading something that the census of commercial shipping in the Chesapeake Bay, around 1900, there were something like 2,000 sail-powered craft out there. You know, these are the coastal schooners, these are all the other boats and things like that. By 1925, the number's down to about 700, almost all of them skipjacks. So in the foreground here, what you've got is when you see these boats with a pointed bow and stern, probably bug eyes. You've got other boats with a tuck stern or with a square stern, and they have all been motorized. Model T engines or whatever. And in the background, you've got the boats that still are under sail. So big changes. Now, every fall before the start of the oyster season, there were skipjack races. Talk a little bit more about that later on. But the skipjack race came about when people were taking their boats out of summer layup, getting them ready for the fall harvest season. So of course you get two boats out there. What are you going to have? Who's my boat's faster than your boat? Right? At one time, these skipjack races, or these races, they were called workboat races back then. You could get 500, 600 boats out there. Just about everybody in the fleet would go. Today, you've got two races going, a third race trying to get going in Annapolis, and to try to start bringing a little more of that tradition back. But the as not only were the way of the location of the oysters changing, but the way you harvested the oysters, the way you could use technology also changed. Now, Maryland law back from the 1840s or 1850s said that you could not use power to dredge for oysters. You could only dredge for oysters under sail. You could use power to pull up the winches, but you couldn't use power for the boat. That was a way of introducing a little bit of inefficiency and a way of controlling the oyster harvest population. So in that graph that I showed you a couple of minutes ago, there was a period of time when it stayed pretty much steady harvest of about 2 million bushels for, 3 or 4 different decades. All of that was, you were either tonging or you were dredging under sail. So push boats were used to power skipjacks. Here we are on the Nathan, our push boat. Our push boat is basically just enough boat to float an engine. You've got a big prop underneath here. You chock it into the stern and you push the skipjack with that boat that's chocked up for the stern. You steer the push boat by these quarter lines on each side, and you kind of angle it. And if you've ever played pool, you know that the angle that you hit that ball with determines which direction the ball's going to fly in. Well, think of it this way here. The angle that that push boat is pushing up against that skipjack is going to help you maneuver or make it very difficult for you to maneuver. Our crew really just loves using the push boat. They're popular, fairly easy to build. Around 800 were built. No one has the real number of how many were actually built, but it's pretty big. People pretty much agree around 800 altogether. Many are built in backyards. And around 300 were built just in Dorchester County alone. But fewer than 30 skipjacks remain afloat today. Here's dredging skipjack style. You can see the dredge is empty, so he's getting ready to drop the dredge back over. He's sailing this way. You can see the wind. And again, he's violating the normal law, because if the boom's over there, you'd probably drop the dredge off the other side. But so I'm not quite sure what he's exactly doing there, but it does show you an example of two skipjacks. You can see boards over here on the side. They usually just put a plywood board just so you could load more oysters on deck. Although you've got a hold, usually they carry the oysters on deck. So think about a skipjack is that when it sails, it's a flat sailer. You don't want the boat to heel too much. You'll lose all your oysters. So they're very flat compared to a modern round hull sailboat on the same tack and the same wind. Regulations do still keep the skipjacks alive. With a skipjack, you can harvest 125 bushels a day using either push boat or power. But a modern workboat is limited to 25 bushels, 12 bushels of license, two licenses on each boat plus one for the boat. So if the oysters are out there, obviously the advantage would be using a skipjack. Even with that, it's not enough to keep all those old boats alive. But you will find working skipjacks at Tillman Island and Deal Island, well, the last two places. There are a few skipjacks around in other places, but the working skipjacks basically fairly local here. Which brings us to the Dorchester Skipjack Committee, which I represent, which Ann represents, and got another Ann on the listening in over there. And we own and operate the Skipjack Nathan of Dorchester. We're a nonprofit organization, all volunteers, and we are there to preserve that skipjack heritage as best we can. The Nathan's last skipjack built to dredge for oysters under sail. It was built by volunteers, about 18,000 hours of volunteer labor. Commissioned July 4th, 1994, so 31 years old. Commercial dredging was impractical. So the Nathan became a floating ambassador for the midshore, and as a source of education to help people both understand the culture and also the ecology of this area. And we've carried over 18,000 passengers so far, at about 18 to 20 per trip. Little picture of the boat being built. And when Nathan was built, it had been about 20 years since the last skipjack. So the next youngest skipjack was 20 years old back in 1993. So when they decided to build a boat, they figured it's a dying art, not many people around, so it was well documented how it was built, so future generation could say and could appreciate what went into that. Boat was all constructed out of local yellow pine and white oak. Old growth loblolly pine. Loblollies, of course, those tall pine trees that grow up like telephone poles. You want old growth. You want them densely packed together because they only grow a little a year. The rings are close together. You have a stronger basic tree that way. So the keels and masts and boom were all of old growth. And parts. The davits and dredges came from Susan May, windlass from Clarence Crockett, and the wheel and gearbox from Wilma Lee. You can't go down to Boat US or one of these little boat stores and buy stuff. You know, it all is either from some old boat reconditioned or you made it yourself. So here's the keelson. The keelson of the boat was a tree. This is the stern of the boat. Bow of the boat is pointing up in that direction. And I did it again. This is a stress test for both me to see if I can back up, and also for the control. Get a good grip on this. So this is the keelson, and as they started building the boat back in 1990-91, and this will be with the centerboard trunkets. The centerboard is cut right into that keelson. So to build a boat, you flip the keelson upside down. Okay, here's the stern. You see a little triangle here is the bottom of the transom. And you start building it upside down, and you build it on molds. You can see these molds here, and basically the shape, that's going to be the shape of the side and the shape of the bottom. And what they're doing up here is they start chipping away to start carving out that keelson so that when you lay your boards on, they'll lay flat and at the right angle. Here it is from the front. Here's this little block of wood right here that goes down is the keelson. You got the inner stem, and then these are the chine logs. Now the chine is basically where it stops, where the side ends and the bottom begins. Okay? So again, upside down, you can see what the shape of that hull is going to be. And it's upside down, but you can see what the shape of the hull is going to be. It's going to be a little curve like that as you build it over. And you can see the chine logs establish that. How many clamps does it take to build a skipjack? A lot.
What do they do? Do they, before they start, do they level off the wood on the ground so it's built symmetrical, or if it's not, it'll be one?
Yeah, probably this picture probably be the best one. What he's doing is he's using this post and this post kind of as to make sure things are square. He'll use a level. If things have to be at a certain angle, you can take a level, you can put a little wedge on it so it's still level at, as it's on that wedge. And but it was done by eyeball. These guys get within a 1/16 of an inch by eyeball, and then the last 1/16 of an inch they'll measure just if they have to. Here you can see the herringbone planks. They plank from the stern forward. Here you can see him working to shape the front of that bow. You can see up here the skipjacks, and this hole in here is where the centerboard centerboard will go down. It has a retractable centerboard. And you can see a bunch of clamps used. This is Harold Ruark using a power planer, creating a lot of Dan glitter, which is another name for sawdust. Here's the hull getting ready to flip over. Okay, so this kind of shows you the planks, side to side. Up in front, you've got chunks, and chunks basically a big chunk of wood that you just carve to fair out that shape so that the bow has the right kind of shape. And this is when they're getting ready to flip the boat over. You start with the bottom, and you do that upside down a lot easier than trying to nail the other way, and then you flip the boat over. Now, there's a couple of stories that about how big you build a skipjack. Okay, skipjacks usually range from about 35 to 70 feet. Big ones, 70 feet, way down the bay, down around Solomon's Island. Typical size around here, 40, 45 feet, big bay. One story was you can only build a boat as big as the number of friends you have, because you need them to help you flip the boat over when you build it. But again, you can see you've got a pretty big centerboard on that. And the centerboard trunk is like a shell that the centerboard goes up in. And when you paint that, you cannot do it in stay neat. You cannot paint that neatly. Your hand is up, paint's dropping on your face and everything. I got a picture of myself looking like I have measles, red paint all over. Once you flip it over, your pine planks are bent to oak frames. What happens is that the only wood that really is seasoned on a skipjack are your mast, your boom, and your bowsprit. This is fairly green wood because you're going to clamp it, you're going to bend it to the frame. They do not use steam plank benders like you would have on a lot of boats. Everything was just clamped. Clamp it far as you can, let it rest for a little while, clamp it far as you can. Another interesting thing about this picture is the bottom. You can see the bottom's all well painted. Today, you cannot use some of the techniques they used back in the early 90s. EPA prevents that. They used old diesel oil, old motor oil, just about anything that they could find to saturate those bottom planks to preserve them. There were a lot of places in there where they drill 1/4-inch holes down, fill that all, the whole bottom would just be flooded with the soil so that it penetrates in. And then you go back with 1/4-inch dowels and pop them into those holes to seal the holes again, so that you had a plank that was well preserved. Now, it ends up not being able to hold paint very well because of all the chemicals that are in it, but it's not going to rot either. So you use long scarf joints for strength. And you can see just regular plying now, and you can see down here where you've got fasteners. Everything is plugged. What you do is you drill a hole, you put your fastener in, and then you seal that hole with a plug, and then you sand that line. The old boats, they use iron. Problem with iron in a wooden boat in water is that it'll rust. No matter what, it's going to rust. 316 stainless on the Nathan, which doesn't rust, but it's kept the boat in place. Here's a view, kind of a deck eye view. I saw this view when they picked me up after I fell over the boat off at one point a number of years ago, dredging. So I've seen that view from the water as I came back on board. But where this is the whale now. Some people call them a gunwale, a gun whale. On a gunboat, that's where the cannons would come through, but that's the whale. And then you've got beams and carlins coming down. And then the cannons and the deck will go on a little later on. So we've used these pictures as we do our maintenance on the boat. So put together, you got a hard chine. You've got a long rub rail on here, which is also cable guard, because your dredge goes off about here and dredge will go down into the water that way. So here's Nathan up for summer maintenance. The boats were basically built to last 20, 25 years. The gear would be salvaged, as you know, Nathan has salvaged gear from older boats no longer in existence. But when maintenance became too expensive or too extensive, the boats were just left to abandon. Floor price was down in Cambridge, sank 3 times as they were waiting to try to get enough money or figure out how to repair it. But finally, burned in 2014. I've got a little piece of the long rail and a couple of pieces of metal from that boat, and you can see how the iron is corroded over the years. But floor price went, here's the bow right up here, as the Samson post, and the bowsprit would be out here like this. So here's the bow of the boat. And this is part of the centerboard trunk. So floor price didn't make it past 2014. There's a love-hate relationship with fiberglass. When I had my boat, I loved a fiberglass boat. It was very easy to maintain. And Warner loved their fiberglass covered workboats because a wooden boat is both expensive and labor intensive to keep up. Fiberglass a lot easier to maintain, but fiberglass on a solid wooden hull traps the moisture on the inside. And so the fiberglass skipjacks look good, but rotting is taking place inside that boat. There are 10 skipjacks right now living on borrowed time. They've been glassed, and one of them is Wadey Murphy's Rebecca Roar, which they fiberglassed. So this is the F.C. Lewis skipjack, and I'm sure the people living in these houses in Cambridge just love that view. The F.C. Lewis was fiberglass. But you look up underneath that boat, there's nothing there. Everything is down to, you've got strongbacks, a 10 by 10 beam that you can just pull apart with your hands. They've rotted that out. So, the boats are disappearing. That way of life is disappearing. And that boat, which still sits down in Cambridge, down at the Ruark Boatworks in Cambridge, that boat it's only a matter of time before they finally say that pile out there just needs to be disposed of. I tell you a couple of other stories about that boat, but
where is
this is in Cambridge. When you go across the bridge in Cambridge, take Maryland Avenue to go into Cambridge, is just before you go across the bridge.
Is that where they have the governor's boat?
Yes.
Right there.
Yep. The presidential yacht is right there.
Yacht.
Yes. Yacht maintenance is right back. Yeah.
The presidential, yeah, you mean?
Yeah. The Sequoia. You see this thing looks like a humongous cocoon all, down there. That's the presidential yacht Sequoia. That was from before Franklin D. Roosevelt on to I think, Nick said it in
Carter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that boat is down there.
How old is that boat?
This boat here probably was built around 1900, 1910.
Oh,
Between 1890 and 1920, the majority of the skipjacks were built. And then they were, so you probably had 300, 400 skipjacks in the water by the end of the First World War.
and then it was fiberglass later?
No, this is way before fiberglass.
Oh, I thought you said that one was.
This one was built around 1910 originally.
Right, but then they fiberglassed it later.
Fiberglass about 15, 20 years ago. So it's sad. And if I were one of the Deal Island guys, well, first of all, your average waterman is about 58, 59 years old. Those are the young guys.
Yeah.
The older ones have sailed into their 80s and 90s. Daddy Art Daniels sailed, and he last went dredging when he was 95 years old. Died about 3 days after that, not because of dredging, but just because he was 95 years old. So it's a dying culture, it's a dying breed. And so if my kid's not interested in my boat, but it's my boat, it's my passion, I'll fiberglass it. I get a few years out of it. I think that's the rationale of some people. So, wooden boat repairs, what does it really take? Well, here's your skipjack. And this is an idea of what you find. So pick a point, any starting point, go from the bow to the stern, come back around the other side. You're always looking for rot. You're always looking for things that need to be repaired. You're always looking for the extent of the repair to be made. We're fortunate with volunteers because labor, shipyard labor, which is $80 to $120 an hour, we don't have to worry about that. We've got labor, we've got that in our organization. So parts are basically what we're basically paying for underneath it. That's how we can keep that boat all wood. If you had to pay for the rest of it, it'd be just prohibited. But you can see, here's the Samson just starting at the bow, the log head, where you've got two pieces of wood joining, no matter how well that's sealed, moisture's going to be get in there. And the interesting thing about the boat is we've got places where we've got oak, places where we've got pine, and wherever you have oak and pine, you've got a place for moisture to get trapped. Pine starts rotting out faster than the oak, but the oak will rot out as well. So, we'll do our surveys every once in a while and start working on things. Replacing a log rail, like remodeling a house, you never know what problems you're gonna have until you get in and see them, okay? So we're very fortunate because, here's that rail log right there, intact, good condition. Here are all your ribs going down, and everything was fine. So we caught it in time when the deck and the log, the moisture, the rot had only gone down part ways, hadn't gone down that next layer. So if you keep up on it, it's a lot less that 10 feet of wood. If you had that done in a shipyard, it's probably a $15,000, $20,000 job if you can find somebody to do the work. Other problem with wooden boats is that there are very few yards left that work on wooden boats. The Sequoia sitting down in Cambridge is a wooden boat sitting in Cambridge because it's one of the places where you may be able to get that work done. The 6 Seaport up in Connecticut does it. The yards in Maine are pretty well closed, so the main boats end up going down to Mystic to get rebuilt. There was a yard down around Newport Newport News, Virginia, that did wooden boats. They transfer all over onto, they're doing Navy metal small boats now. So, very, very few places that can do that work anymore. And of course, St. Michael's over at the Maritime Museum, they both have the training program for apprentices as well as do a lot of boat restoration over there themselves. So very, very few places left around to do the work, which is another stress on maintaining the fleet. Bottom plank replacement. Okay, so here's the Nathan. So you've got your chine log up here. You got one of the planks. Replacing one of the planks, you've got 21 8-inch 3/16 stainless ring nails. Now, ring nails are meant to go in, not to come back out. Okay? However, if you are a licensed commercial passenger vessel, which a Nathan is, or Coast Guard licensed suspected, every 5 years, you have to randomly pull bottom fasteners for the Coast Guard so they can inspect it. So here you've got a plank that's 3 inches. You've got about an inch of space countersunk down there, and then you got that nail driven up into that plank. So you've got to be able to drill out the plug, get something underneath the head of that nail, and then work that nail out. It takes about half an hour to get one of the nails out. Because we use 3/16, there's never been any sign of corrosion in any of the nails, but, and both we and the Coast Guard keep a map of where we've inspected. So every year every 5 years, they'll say, I want this one, I want that one, I want that one, and you will pull those nails out for their inspection to make sure, so they know the boat is safe. It's destructive testing, because obviously you're tearing the boat as well. But this is the one plank that was replaced on Nathan 31 years. All that old motor oil and diesel oil and everything else that they use to saturate those other planks, it's still doing the job. Loblolly pine for the mast and boom. Every once in a while, you got to replace the mast and boom. Whenever there's a major mishap on a passenger carrying boat, directives go out to everybody who has a commercial passenger boat. Inspect this, inspect that. A catamaran off of Hawaii and lost an aluminum mast. You better check your wooden mast. Everybody does that. So you're always planning ahead. So finding 65, 70 feet straight logs of a tree that's 100, 110 years old that you can use to replace a mast is something you don't just, I think I'll go down to Lowe's and get a mast today. So, it takes a long time. So, you gotta find the wood, then you gotta get it someplace to work on it, then you debark it and you turn it every once in a while so that you can let things start to season. Some of them season well, some of them you'll find, gee, that beautiful looking tree I can't use because there's a flaw somewhere that we didn't find until we started putting it together. You can also fabricate new booms. You can, so what happens is you've got square pieces of wood with a V cut into it, and you run them around, and then you knock off the edges and make a round out of that. So this is how you fabricate a boom or mast. And today, with fewer and fewer good trees being around, this is what's happening. The boom on the Nathan, which used to be bowed like this, is now built out of fir, and it's nice and straight. Mast, we're trying a new mast this year that's out of an old tree, but the next mast on the Nathan, I guarantee, will be built this way because you just can't get the wood in anymore. And structurally, this is as strong as any intact tree.
Doesn't it make it heavier too? Because this is a bunch of wood glued together, so you've got that glue, that added weight. Does that
It
become a
can,
problem?
it can be a little, and usually not enough of a problem.
Okay.
The boats are big enough to be able to handle it.
I think it'd be less. I would think it'd be less because you have a hole in it. Once you machine it down to round, or you.
Well, yeah, you're probably looking at
Oh, it's
a
hollow.
pipe, I guess. Yeah, it's hollow.
Oh, I didn't know.
But you're looking basically at a pipe that's probably 2 to 3 inches thick. It's still heavy.
Gosh.
And so you wonder where all the clamps and everything goes from everybody's yard. I mean, as you're putting that together, there's a lot of clamps, And we're fortunate. We, between CBBM and the Richardson Boat down in Cambridge, there are a couple of real good boat shops around that we can use that are big enough for us to spread out and do our work. Cabin repairs. Anytime you have 2 pieces of wood that match together, you've got end grain, you've got a place for moisture to get in, and even if you use marine grade plywood or whatever, eventually things are gonna start rotting. So cabin repairs, you use the sawzall to get in there and cut things out, chisels down to dust brooms to kind of get at things, to get at the work. So here we are up on the hard doing some work. We'll do work on the boat in the water or the boat on land. And we're very fortunate to have a really wonderful maintenance crew for the Nathan. Wooden blocks, another yearly maintenance task. Every once in a while, somebody will find an old block in some antique store or something, pick it up, bring it along, and we'll rebuild it. We may be able to use it, repurpose it on the Nathan. Again, not the kind of thing you can find on Amazon or at your local boat store. But it's a yearly task. So the guys learn about sheaves and everything else. And we've been very fortunate because one of the guys at the Maritime Museum, Sam Hilgart, who did all the rigging on the Maryland Dove, has taught us a lot about rebuilding these things and a lot about rigging. We to keep these boats going, to keep them afloat. We have sponsored the Chop Tank Heritage Skipjack race the last Saturday in September. You can stand out on the dock and you can watch the boat sail by. This is one of the years when we had wind. We have some years when it's a drifting contest. But rather than have boats pay us to participate in fees, we raise funds and we give every boat show-up money. So every boat gets $1,000, $1,200 to put towards their maintenance. It's our way of fundraising and helping the other boats have money to for their own preservation. $1,000 can help a lot in deferring some of the maintenance costs. I had love about these boats every day. This is a quote from Captain Stan Daniels. Stan's father, Daddy Art, last went dredging when he was 95. Stan says, you love those old boats like an old dog. You fall in love with them and you hate to see them die. They become part of you. That's what it is. Like your wife and family. Every captain loves his boat, but a skipjack's a little special. It's unique. There's a lot packed into that statement, okay? First of all, loving old boats like a dog. In Easton, a few years ago, you used to see guys come in from Tillman Island, they'd have their dogs in the back of their pickup trucks. You don't see that anymore. Somebody complained, I think, and the guys have to have the dog sitting inside the truck. But those dogs were happier than anything being out there. So the relationship between these guys and dogs is definitely unique. Their wives, well, I mean, I'm sure they love their wives too, but their wives learn to live with the other mistress in the family, which is the boat. And if you've ever had the privilege of being with any of the old skipjack captains, when they step foot on a boat again, you see a changed man. The aches and the pains, the worries go away when they step on that boat. When they step on that boat, they are a young man again, even if only for a short period of time. So it is unique. It's almost spiritual that they have. And again, as these people are passing away, that's part of our heritage that is also fading into the distant past. So this is part of the reason why some of those guys at DLL are fiberglassing their boats, just so they get a little more love out of them while they're around. Because after they're gone, some people aren't going to care. I'm not sure how you ever restore a boat that has been fiberglass that needed restoration. You know, I'm not sure you could ever do that. Probably wouldn't be. You'd probably have about 8 or 9% of the original boat left, and everything else would probably be new. But they are unique. The boats are unique. There is a love affair, but it's also part of being a waterman. I can only speak from observation, not from personal experience. But just as a poet is inspired by flowers or sunrise or knitting or something else like that, when they get out in that boat, when they go out, they feel the breeze, they're rocking back and forth to the waves, they're dredging, they're watching the sun come up, they're watching the sun set. That's like a poetic experience, like a poetic and spiritual experience for these guys. And they're enjoying it. So, Nathan is a Coast Guard. Nathan is a Coast Guard licensed commercial passenger vessel. We have a Coast Guard licensed captain, trained volunteer crew. As we sail, our docents tell stories. And as you can see, here's the boat. You can see the winds blowing from this direction, winds blowing like this. The boat's tilted a little bit, but not very much, because again, flat sailing. Docents talking about telling stories, passengers. Our first class seating is with cushions. Second class seating is just on plywood deck cots. We let our passengers take the wheel. Kids love it, and we love having them on board. Here I am, over the main sheet. Oh, we dredge for oysters, and we also report the oyster health to the Maryland DNR. We have a scientific collection permit so that we can dredge anywhere, any time of year. And, we usually dredging on Kirby, on the Kirby bar down in Cambridge. And through the year, we're letting them know how those oysters are doing. What you do is you keep track of live oysters and you keep track of bucks. A box is recently dead, shells up, but the shell's still connected together. So you keep track of the box and the live oysters. The more bucks you have, the more stress that bed is under. So we keep track of that, and every 2 years, if you are a statistician, you can read a excruciatingly detailed report by the scientists at the University of Maryland about the median mode, prime numbers, and all kinds of statistics about those oysters. And our data goes in to help them. So we dredge for oysters, demonstrate that. We pick up other exotic things off the bottom. If it's somebody dumps it overboard, chances are you can dredge it up sooner or later. So Most exotic thing I picked up is an old toilet seat from somebody. Had barnacles and a couple of oysters. And, oysters want that hard surface to grow on, and so they were on the toilet seat. We didn't put the toilet seat back, we kept it. Same thing when we find old beer bottles or whatever, we recycle them as we do our bit to try to clean up the bay, one dredge lick at a time. So, come sail with us. I'm Nathan or Dorchester. We sail from Long Wharf down in Cambridge every Saturday from now till October. At the end of October, sails are 2 hours long. You can register online, and we'd love to have you sailing with us. This is my list of resources. It's in your handout. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the books here, because if you want to learn a little bit more about people, first two books, Waterman and Skipjack, are both written in fairly modern times. Waterman, I think, is from 1970s, Tillman Island, and Skipjack by Christopher White is a much more modern book, about the same place. So you can read the same family over a 20, 30-year period of time. Good books. They do give you an insight into what the working life in today's Waterman is like. The small community of people are still out there, existing within a broader community of weekenders and retirees. So you've really got the local culture and a broader culture of people who come here just because they love living here. Chesapeake Bay Skipjacks by Howard Chappell. Howard wrote a number of different books, but his book basically is compiled from the 1940s when he ran a boat yard down in Cambridge. He took the lines out of a lot of different boats. So the lines of the last scraper that was still around back then are in Howard's book. Number of different skipjacks, evolution of the different boats. Great resource. Oyster War of the Chesapeake Bay by John Winterstein, an excellent book. If you're interested in oyster pirates, I read his book and found all the original material, and there's a lot of stuff he left out, and there's a lot of things that we could talk about in terms of oyster wars during the 1880s when the sheriffs formed posses, commandeered steam tugs to go out to defend their local oyster beds from these pirates. I've got some real cool stories about that. Working Skipjacks at Deal Island by Bryce Stump is a photo, a really black and white photo history of working skipjack. You can see what it is like to work on the boats. Everything but the smell, okay, is in Bryce's book. Very well done. Okay, The Oyster Industry by Ernest Ingersoll. That's that book that I quoted from. You can find that online. Chesapeake Bay Skipjack by Pat Wojcik. That's a book probably 20, 25 years old now, but it's a nice pictorial book of skipjacks. I think you can find that probably over at the museum store at CBBM. Maryland Skipjacks by David Barry. That's one of these paperback, just a bunch of pictures of different skipjacks taken at very different times. Chesapeake Bay Sailing Craft by Robert Burgess, and this was Chesapeake Bay, both by Burgess. Burgess was probably 1930s, 1940s. He was a guy who would go around as all these boats were being scrapped and save stuff from them. So a lot of the trail boards, the nameplates on the front of the boat, he saved a lot of them. And I think many of his are over. Yeah, so they're over at St. Michael's. So again, giving you a little bit of idea of what life was like before things changed. So and two other things. skipjacknathan.org, our website, or the last Skipjacks, last Skipjacks website, really kind of the final countdown of Skipjacks. It's like basically tells a little bit about what is remaining in terms of skipjacks today. And then internet. I found a lot on the website Chronicling America. Chronicling America basically had a lot of old newspaper articles. They were photographed. They were not digitized, they're photographed, but kind of the microfiche, those little microfiche machines. The digital version of that, which you can now put up on your computer, you can see this big page of stuff and you can zero in on a section of it. So this helped me keep my sanity during the COVID lockdown, as I would be out there and I could lose myself back in the 1880s, finding out who did what when, and what's the sequence of event that led to a certain event or something. So great resources in terms of skipjacks and a little bit on the culture for you to take a look at. So the next year, somebody may use these and come back with a new
Well,
program.
I already wrote down, Oyster Wars, quoting you for a proposal.
I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, and the time is just about right.
Thank you, Bob.